Mikey, welcome. That feels like an awkward welcoming. So much pressure when you're getting started on like any type of opening, any type of welcome. But welcome back to Onward and Inward, or Dirty Tap Water. We were kind of, I think the thought came up of perhaps, it seems like we're experiencing a little bit of an identity crisis here on our second episode of what's our name? We started out last episode asking you, what's in a name? Onward and Inward. And I guess maybe that's a good place to start. Secondly, it seems like you brought up the Dirty Tap Water as a pretty strong contender. Why do you like that? What sticks out to you, man?
Dirty Tap
so
Water.
Grungy.
It is kind of grungy. It does fit where we're both from too.
Yeah.
I like it because you and I, you were reading Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell right when John Ellender and I started writing music.
Yeah.
And that was right around the time. I think Malcolm Gladwell is the 10,000 hour guy originator. The rule, you need 10,000 hours to be able to get.
And I don't think he was the original. Maybe he is. I don't think so. But he had a whole chapter on it in that book.
He was the first person I heard it from, and I heard that from you. And that was when John and I were doing our first ever times of like sitting in the living room and saying, "We're gonna write music and see what comes out."
Yeah.
And I remember you being like, "Yes." I didn't even know that the Beatles had spent all that time in Hamburg.
Yeah.
And you were like, "This is your Hamburg." And ever since,
dude.
John and I have used that phrase quite a bit. And then for John, he had found an interview with Ed Sheeran where Ed had talked about, I think there was some interviewer that said, you must have been born so talented. You must have always had this ability. He's like, well, not really. I don't really know what brand of English accent he has, but he kind of made the claim that he just worked. He was like, whatever the top guy was doing, I was going to do 3 times that. And he showed a voice memo of him doing his first ever song that he had recorded of himself, and it was just atrocious. And he was like, "You got to turn on the dirty tap water for it to run pure." Yeah. Yeah, man. So it seems like that captures what we're doing here. We're just doing it with ideas.
Yeah.
We're doing it with figuring out what we think.
We're doing it with everything. This is the dirty
My whole
tap
life
water.
is just tap water.
In varying degrees of clearness. Tell the I think that Hamburg Story is so cool. Can you tell it?
Yeah. Well, if anybody's looking for an amazing Beatles documentary, there's one on Disney Plus called Get Back, which documents their month or so up until the rooftop concert, where if you guys, everyone's probably seen maybe at least some footage of the rooftop concert.
I don't think I have.
You haven't? Oh, it's worth the deep dive for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, so they were together not that long. I'm not a total Beatle nut, but they made an absurd amount of albums in I think around 7 years.
Yeah.
And not only was it just an incredible volume of creative work, but it was all revolutionary.
Yeah.
But before that period where they were super productive, they had spent, I forget how long, but they had spent a good amount of time in Hamburg, Germany.
Yeah. I want to say maybe 3 years.
Like 8 hours a day.
Yeah.
I think that might be where maybe Malcolm did the math and was like, I'm pretty sure they got their 10,000 hours.
Yeah.
Before they even were really releasing music.
Yeah.
And they had just learned so many covers. And what was so cool about the documentary is that they would just sit there and do rep after rep after rep after rep.
Yeah.
And then eventually you'd be like, wait, I know this version. This is the one on the record.
Yeah.
And that's kind of their mindset, is like they would just sit there and do 50 reps of a song all day long. And when they would get bored, they would pull out all of these covers that they knew.
Yeah.
They had this sort of endless list of cover songs they could pull out. So you could tell that those takes that we all know so well of things like Let It Be and just timeless songs.
Yeah.
Those takes usually happened all at once, but you know, it was the 10,000 hours. It was the Hamburg. It was the dirty
Yeah.
tap water.
Yeah. And remembering too from what I read so many years ago, it was that like they were playing so long and they were just playing at these places, like they weren't playing originals, that they had to learn everything. Like because they would run through a set and they just wouldn't have any more songs. And they'd run through a set and they'd run through a genre, and they were just playing like every day over and over again, and for like the same groups of people. I don't think it was in strip clubs, but I think it was some kind, like something, you know, maybe somewhere between a bar and a strip club, somewhere there, if I'm remembering correctly, and if not, someone please correct me if I'm wrong. But yeah, I think there's such a fear of beginning. Like there's such a fear of getting started, and that's why I think what resonates for me with the dirty tap water is that it's like grungy. It's kind of blue collar, kind of like the Ohio Valley, you know, old steel town, kind of run down. And I drank tap water all my life until very recently. I got a reverse osmosis filter, and I'm not gonna lie, I don't think I'll go back. But I think it speaks to this idea of just doing it. That's how you learn. You know, you just go for it and you shoot for it. But I think something else that's interesting that comes up there, and I think is kind of a tension that you and I are wrestling with, is this tension between like hyper productivity and learning. I remember months ago we were on the phone and you were like, I'm just learning how to non-do. Just like this, and we were like, this weekend all I'm doing is non-doing. You know, so this tension between trying to learn how to do things really well and that idea of like, hey, we're just going to drill this. Like we're going to do it over and over and over again. We're going to rep it out. Like we're going to work. I remember you and I in high school, you know, you were wrestling and I was playing basketball, and we loved this video of like the guru, who this guy came to him and so I was like, I want to be successful. He was like, oh yeah, like,
want to breathe.
Yeah. He said, oh yeah, like come to the pier at 5 a.m. tomorrow. You know, so this guy comes to the pier, he goes out in the water. And this guru says, do you want to be successful? And the guy's like, yeah. And what the guru does is he shoves his head underwater and like holds him underwater. And the dude's like freaking out because he doesn't want to drown. And he comes up. He's like, what the hell? You know, the guru shoves him down again. You know, I don't know if this is some type of baptism, because I think the story says he did it 3 times, right? But then afterwards, he's like, what are you doing? And, you know, the guy says exactly what you just said. Like, you'll be successful when you want to be successful as badly as you want to breathe. Like, that's when you'll be successful. You know, so much of my life has been like wanting it and work hard. And I certainly learned that from my dad, like just Polish, like hard work, grit through it. And so that idea of like kind of repping it out, I think is so important, so valuable. And I think the other tension that you and I have started wrestling with, stepping more into esoteric, right? Stepping more into just spirituality, but especially mindfulness. Recognizing that we have this doing capacity, but we also have this being capacity, right? And that if we get stuck in the doing, we just burn out, you know, and the doing can never be happy, because there's always something else to do. And so I think one of the other, you know, tensions when you say that is this idea between productivity and non-doing, non-productivity, like being. I think I sent you the podcast to Tim Ferriss and Rich Roll on what was it? What was the title? Tim Ferriss is like the productivity guy. He wrote the 4-Hour Work Week, the 4-hour like workout week, the 4-hour like kitchen. And the podcast was all about unoptimizing, about how Tim Ferriss is saying like, hey, essentially I'm realizing that I was doing all this stuff to try to compensate. And now I'm learning like, that's not what I want. Like I'm actually unoptimizing. I'm learning that life is better when I'm able to both think and execute and do, like, and feel. And so I think that's something else that I think is core to the dirty tap water, is like putting things out there, but it's also this idea of like just giving, space to breathe.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But that's what I think. What do you think?
For those of you who don't know, we're quoting Russell Brand's infamous intro. Yeah. John and I often joke that our greatest asset in the music world is that we're sort of less musicians and we're more athletes.
Yeah.
Like we weren't trained classically. We can't read music. Although I was technically trained classically, I still can't read music.
Yeah.
That's a whole funny story. I've told you that, right?
Yeah.
Where I was I just hated doing sight reading so much that I would intentionally blur my eyes. And eventually my mom was like, she took me to the eye doctor. I was like, Mom, I just can't do it. And she took me there, and I think I was like 8 or 9, and I tried to like intentionally flunk the eye exam.
Oh my gosh.
But I was young enough to be able to like think that I could get away with that, but old enough to feel somewhere in my gut like this eye doctor he saw right through it. And
no pun intended, huh?
Saw right through it. And he was like, later in life, my mom told me, like, your son is either blind or he's lying. But needless to say, I didn't learn how to sight read. But John and I,
But you got a snazzy pair of glasses that you probably lost.
Well, part of that too, I think, is that I wanted to look like Harry Potter. Harry Potter didn't have readers though that were. I think. Well, I'm almost positive that this eye doctor ended up giving my mom like non-prescription glasses to be like, he doesn't need anything, but like, here.
Oh my gosh, that's hysterical.
But yeah, like the thing that I have run into with productivity that has been so challenging, I would say, is with creativity, you can't really sit there and treat it like an exercise routine. You can't, it'd be one thing if you said, what would happen if I gave myself 1 year to become as fit as possible in terms of cardiovascular fitness and strength. And if you really committed to that and said, if I'm not working out, I'm going to be relaxing and resting and recovering for tomorrow. You could go so much further than if it wasn't your main priority. Mm-hmm. They're coming for you, John Paul. They're coming.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm downtown Steubenville and coming and going.
Where was I going?
But you can't.
Sorry.
I think there's a nuance here. You can't effort creativity. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Right, but you can treat it like an exercise, but it's something that what you can do is you can, to a certain extent, like you can set up the opportunity for creativity to emerge.
That's right. Yeah.
But you can't make it emerge in that space. Mm-hmm. But if you set it up and you try to make it emerge in that space, like it won't appear. And like that's what the dirty tap water is about. Mm-hmm. Right? It's like, hey,
we're just that creativity is you don't know. Right. Like if you were to give yourself an exercise routine of strength and endurance, you would be pretty sure you would improve drastically. But you could give yourself 8 hours a day to write poetry or to write a novel, and you might end up at the end of the year with nothing, or you might be prolific. You might write more or create something more alongside your life. If you're doing it an hour a day. There's something about creativity that seems almost synonymous with experimentation. But like you said, you could put yourself in the space for it, and it's going to make it a lot more likely that creative stuff will come out of you. Yeah. But it is, there's this like muscle you can develop, or maybe as Andy on Headspace says, you can become familiar with what it is to receive, what it is to let things in your own inner life show up without you immediately putting them into some kind of strange yoga contortion or like doing some kind of gymnastics with it, and just letting it be what it is. Yeah. That is a skill that probably when we were doing wrestling and basketball in school,
gosh,
we weren't really familiar with.
That's why I sucked. Because I was efforting everything. I mean, I was working. I was so desperate, and it's because I was so desperate for approval. And I was so desperate for recognition because I thought that was the answer to me feeling miserable, which it wasn't. Because I kind of got that when I got to college. I was compared to my high school career, was way more successful, and it was very interesting for me going from high school where I was trying so hard and also terrified to make a mistake, because if I made a mistake, I was like pulled immediately and I like didn't have time already, to getting to college. And I remember I was in a game in my freshman year, and I made a mistake, right? And I just looked at the bench and I started walking. And my coach, John Lamana, who had a huge impact on my life, he really kind of started to teach me about virtue, that virtue wasn't just like this thing that you try to be, like that there's like more depth to it. He just looked at me. He was like, John Paul, what the hell are you doing? Like, let's go. And like that was such a beautifully empowering moment for me. Because it was an experience where it was like, to me, it was like, oh, like, and I'm tearing up right now. So thank you, John Lamana. But to me, like up until that point, it's like you make a mistake and you're out. Mm. And so everything was such an effort. Everything was such a tight grip. Like I have to think about it. I have to think about what move I'm going to do. And so I was totally up in my head, and there was no space for this intuiting. There was no space for flow. There was no space for rhythm and just going where it feels necessary to go. And what he did when he said this, like, what the hell are you doing? Like, let's go, like, get back on defense. Was essentially what he said to me is like, hey, JP, like, you have permission to make mistakes here. And I'm still going to be in your corner, and we can look at those mistakes and we can address them and we can fix them. But like, let's give you a little bit of space. And I think that's what we can, for things like creativity. I think this is the same exact thing with sleep, right? You can't effort yourself into falling asleep, because the part of your brain that's associated with efforting is the part of your brain that's associated with wakefulness, and activity and execution. And so I remember when as I was learning mindfulness, when I started learning that, I think we've talked about Viktor Frankl's idea of paradoxical intention. Viktor Frankl, there's this story, and he learned this. He developed what's called logotherapy. Everybody knows him for Man's Search for Meaning. He survived the Holocaust, and he was a doctor and became a psychiatrist. Wait, your dad met him, right?
He met him. My dad went to his office in Vienna for like,
yeah.
I think it was like my dad's first articulation of an intrusive thought, and
yeah,
Viktor Frankl was like, "You're gonna be fine, bro. You're doing great." Yeah, it was wild. Yeah.
Man, the freedom that can come when we as young people are so overwhelmed by the problems we have, we go to someone who's wise and it's like, oh, yeah, you'll be all right. That's pretty normal. It's like, oh my gosh,
Yeah, that's what he said. He was like, the fact that this guy who we all revered and who had written the book just felt so confident in my the fact that my problem wasn't going to overwhelm me. His confidence gave me that secure base to say, I think I'm going to be okay.
Which is cognitive diffusion, right? That's the exact opposite. If someone's like, oh no, we gotta resolve this thought that's here. Like that is just adding to the trap of that obsessive compulsive cycle, right? Of that, like this intrusive thought, I got to take care of it. It's like that would have probably it could have really sent your dad down a different path. But the idea of like, oh no, it's okay. Like you're going to be fine. That's that diffusion to say like, okay, there's this thought. You don't have to identify with it. You don't have to reject it. You don't have to crush it. You could just be like, yeah, that's kind of a bummer, but like, that's okay. So anyway, that's so funny to me.
There's those two ideas of like, first being free to not make a mistake. And then there's the secure base idea. Yeah. And I'm curious, I wanted to ask you if you'd be willing to share if there was any moments for you where you felt like you were given permission to screw up or permission to fail that was okay, like as long as you were trying hard. Would you have any moments, at least in basketball, where you felt that transition?
I mean, I think that was it. That time was that exactly. And after that, the door was just opened. The tap was opened. Right? Like, but really after that, what emerged was like, oh, like if I'm not doing whatever I'm doing for fear of making mistakes, and if I'm doing whatever I'm doing because I think it's the right thing to do in the game, well, then all of a sudden it completely shifted from this fear-based mentality to more of, and it took years and years to master, and I still didn't have it down, this more kind of intuitive side. But if I had to put my like finger on it, that was really it in that space. To that degree, it was just like, yeah, the permission to fail. So thank you so much, John Lamana. And I think that's what, like, I don't know what I was going to say. Probably was going to try to say something profound or smart or interesting.
Just we'll notice those thoughts, label them, and let them go. The thing that it's bringing to mind for me is just in this moment, there. On the one hand, I think, oh yeah, I've got all kinds of permission to mess up. Look at all the creative stuff I'm doing. I feel like John and I can sit down and write a song, but there's so much perfectionism that I feel still, maybe less so in like the actual song itself, but sometimes it's in the production. For example, right now we've got 30 songs that are just sitting, getting dust on them. And I know how to use Logic, which is the audio interface that is kind of like the program for you to use music and to make music digitally. But there's such a temptation of, but it can always be better, and you can tweak things to no end. You can turn knobs to no end. But where it feels most present right now is that ability to make mistakes. Is I feel as though mistakes in this space they feel costly because it's public. And I'm curious if there's any way we can find a way to bypass that for ourselves in here. Is there some permission we need to give ourselves? Is there some disclaimer we can give to the public about our limitations? Like, because that space of flow where you are following your intuition, I find is where you can, for me at least, it's where my creative work comes from, but it's also where I am at. It's the most accurate representation of me as a person.
Yeah.
And I guess what I mean by that is that if I'm really just taking what I think is the most true thing right now and either living it or saying it or sharing it emotionally with a person, they're getting me. They're getting the most up-to-date, of the process of becoming that is me. And the most connected. But it almost seems like we need spaces for that culturally, whether it's like, hey, can we use a safe word, a buzzword that says, hey, everything that we're saying right now, this is exploratory.
Possible hogwash.
Yeah, this is based, as John Paul and I used to always say, or John Paul always used to say, I think I'm right, but this is also just based entirely on a vague hunch.
A vague hunch, man. Yeah. Yeah, man, well, I think I don't think it's about doing. I think it's about non-doing. I think this connects with Viktor Frankl's. I think it's more about what our intention isn't than what our intention is, right? They talk about happiness. Happiness is something, and so many of these immaterial goods like happiness, friendship, whatever it is. Well, I don't know why I'm saying any of that stuff, but happiness is something that, like, when you try to grab it, there's nothing but air. And when you try to force it, like when you try to grab it, when you try to find it, there's nothing there. But when you stop looking, it emerges. And going back to Viktor Frankl's idea of paradoxical intention, he was working with this man in his practice after, of course, developing logotherapy after the concentration camps. And this guy came to him with a stutter. And he was trying to work through the stutter, and Viktor Frankl said, well, is there ever any time that you haven't stuttered before? And he was like, well, there was like this one time, but I was just a boy. And Frankl was like, well, what happened? And of course it was in German. I'm sure it was like, it was not this flow of language.
That's a microaggression against my people.
Yeah, well, Mike, you are a microaggression, I guess. I heard it from you first. But he said, well, this one time when I was a little boy, I stole a loaf of bread from the market. And the police officer came and caught me. And the man who had a stutter for his whole entire life, he said to Viktor Frankl, I just said to myself, just be the stupid, stuttering boy that you are. Just stutter like you always do, and he'll feel bad for you and let you go. And he said that for the first and really only time in his life, he spoke completely clearly without any stutter whatsoever. And so essentially what Viktor Frankl found is that this is super effective also for people who have to, give presentations or fear of like sweating, or for people who can't fall asleep. Essentially with someone who's fear of giving a presentation, he says, like, go up there and try to sweat as much as you possibly can. Or essentially, it's a paradox of intention. Try to do the opposite of what you're trying to do. And I think what that is really just letting go of the effort, the fear of not doing it, and to fall asleep, right? Viktor Frankl says, well, imagine yourself, keep your eyes open, look at the ceiling, and imagine yourself meticulously scrubbing and mopping the ceiling.
It's so interesting where I notice myself at times I'm so tired, and then I lay down in bed and
Yes.
I'm no longer tired at all.
Yes.
Or if I've tried that before where I keep my eyes open, which I must look like an absolute crazy person in the dark, lying there with my eyes open.
Mike's just in bed.
I find that my eyes start to get heavy, and that creates this like subjective feeling of, I'm so tired. I wish I didn't have to keep my eyes open. You almost have to give yourself something that you don't want to do that makes you like sleeping.
Well, I think the key is that I think that can be effective, but I think the key is to not try to fall asleep. I think that's what those things have in common, is not efforting yourself to fall asleep. And like, I think that's what, if we want to have any type of, like, Rogan talks about this, and he talks about another guy who articulated, who I don't know his name, but he talks about like honoring the muse. And this is why I kind of push back a little bit on the idea of you can't treat creativity like in athletic training. But what essentially he says is that what you have to do is you have to honor the muse. You just have to show up. But that really is it. Like, you can't show up and then try to effort the muse in the hour. Like, you just have to show up for an hour and like see what emerges. And essentially what he says is treat creativity like it's actually a person, like it's actually a thing, that if you really show up without an agenda, will emerge all on its own. And this is really what's at the heart of mindfulness. It's the idea that our minds at the nature of mind, or the resting place of mind, is not cluttered and busy and anxious and afraid. It's actually calm, and there's a sense of connection, and it's that our thinking kind of shows up, and our fears, and it clutters the space. And so mindfulness isn't about cultivating this feeling. It's actually about like clearing the space from those thoughts. And the only way you can stop judgment is to not add to it. Like, that's the thing. The only way you can not add to more thought is to stop thinking, because you're not trying to stop it, is not add to it. And then, like, all of a sudden, when the reaction tendency stops, when the judgment stops, like, what naturally emerges is like, wow, this natural tendency of the mind, which is, equanimity. But I think it's not so much trying to create something as it is being intentional to not do something else. And I think that's just efforting. I think that's I think it's about allowing space to really, really just show up. But I'm curious, what's what your thoughts are, what your take, what's emerging here?
What's here now?
What's here now?
That's
And there's
like
no problem to solve.
the one agreement John Paul and I made before we started record on this podcast was, let's just keep asking each other what's showing up right now, which is the most therapist thing two people could do.
Two therapists in a room. Yeah.
Well, do you remember the watering the flower metaphor from Headspace? It occasionally pops up on those daily meditations, but
that was your most recent blog post, was it not?
That was the most recent blog post, yeah.
Yeah, tell me about it.
The metaphor kind of goes like, sometimes we want to have a certain outcome with the state of the mind, whether it's we want a more peaceful mind, we want a more loving mind, we want a less judgmental mind, we want a more compassionate mind. But if, like you're saying, if we're seeking a quiet mind, if we're seeking a happy mind, we're going to go directly to quieting the mind, to slowing it down, which creates more tension. Now what we have is we have disquiet, we have thoughts, and we have reactionary thoughts to that disquiet. Yeah. And now we have double the disquiet. Yeah. And so the kind of the basic idea then would be, rather than trying to have a certain outcome, your job is not to have a plant grow or have a flower grow. Yeah. Because fundamentally we can't make a flower grow. Yeah. But what we can do is we can put it in the sunniest, I guess, south facing windowsill in the house. Yeah. We can give it good soil. We can water it the proper amount. We can trim the dead leaves whenever they show up. Unless, I'm sure there's plants you can't trim. If it's a succulent, you don't really have to do anything. But if you do all of those things...
I can tell you about succulents.
That was a loaded statement. I'm talking about something that John Paul knows a lot about. But if you water the thing and you give it good soil and you give it sunlight, you can reasonably hope that it will bear fruit or will grow. And I find that to be such a helpful metaphor when it comes to mindfulness. And I think that directly translates to the creative act. What I'm really exploring right now is, for a time, I was not really meditating with any regular consistency, and I would do it whenever I felt like I needed to. Maybe when I was overwhelmed, or maybe when I was stressed. And I was so baffled because it just, quote, wasn't working. Yeah. And it was because I was using it not as anaphylaxis, but I was using it around, not anaphylaxis. Anaphylaxis is when you get stung by a bee and you...
I know, I was going to follow up on that and be like, what do you mean?
Prophylactically. I wasn't using it as, this is a preventative practice that I do every day with commitment. Yeah. I was using it PRN. And the psychological experience of that was just night and day. Because if I'm going in...
What do you mean by that? Like, what do you mean by those two things? Like...
Yeah, so the thing that I'm doing now is I'm doing it every day, 10 minutes a day or 15, but it happens every single day. And that way I know, when I sit down, I might not technically, in quote, need to do it, right? It's not something that needs to happen in that moment. But the psychological experience of when I have a busy mind, because I know I'm doing it even when I don't need it, it doesn't feel like avoidance. It doesn't feel like I'm sitting down to get rid of the busy mind. I can bring the curiosity that comes from being committed to it. Versus if I only do it when I say, man, I've got a really busy mind right now, I find that psychologically there's almost like an invisible avoidance there that just shuts the whole practice down.
Yeah. Well, it's try to dissociate. Like mindfulness, certainly, and I think this is the way that it's shared and by therapists, by like the culture at large. The Sam Harris has a great thing that says, don't meditate because it's good for you. And he says, sure, like it's going to bring all those things, but if we try to use mindfulness is about not using. It's about being. And if we try to use it as a tool, then it ceases to be what it is. And so then that, I think there is a way that we can use mindfulness as a sort of dissociation to distance ourselves from our feelings to avoid the pain. But the beauty of mindfulness in its purity is that it teaches us how to just be with whatever is here. I was telling you about that time, one one of the meditations on waking up of this is the way things are right now. And that's
you gotta tell the story.
I gotta tell the story. Okay. Oh my gosh, what a story. So I'm on a supervision meeting. And I have this beautiful cup of tea right here. Really big cup of tea. And my great mug. Brother-in-law got it for me. Thank you, Michael Blankenberger. I just made it, just boiled it. I had the like cup of tea right here, and my computer's like on a stand. And I'm in this supervision meeting with 4 other women, right? And I'm the only guy. And I sit down and I try to adjust. It's a Zoom meeting. I try to adjust my computer, and I knock over my tea, like all over myself. And I freaked out. Like I absolutely freaked. I just stood up, I jumped, and I was screaming. I was like, oh, fuck, like just over and over again because I was in so much pain. And I'm just ripping off my clothes because the tea's just like all in my clothes, and I'm just like ripping off my clothes. And then I'm standing in the corner on the couch in my room where there was like a sofa. I'm like standing in the corner, like, and then I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm in the middle of a supervision meeting with all these women, and I'm just naked in my corner now with all my colleagues. Now I looked over and my laptop had shut.
Was your microphone on?
No, my laptop, like in the course of me jumping up and like knocking everything, like my laptop had shut. But for a split moment, like the pain was only overwhelmed by the unbearable embarrassment before I saw that my like computer was shut, of just like standing naked, you know, and thinking it was in front of a bunch of colleagues. And it was, you know, and then my wife ran and was like, what's wrong? What's wrong? And I'm just like, they're like screaming, crying. And I'm just like, I just spilled tea. It's like such a child, which I know you have tea burn experiences, right? I'm just telling my wife, like, it hurts so bad, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, and it honestly, man, it was the worst pain that I've felt in years. And so then I got into the shower, and previously there's a meditation on waking up, and by Annika Harris, and it's about learning how to stay present in times of great suffering. And one of the things she says in there is that there was a moment that she was going through something really difficult, and a mentor said to her, he just simply said, this is the way things are right now. And so during the meditation,
you're telling me her mentor gaslit her?
Right, and that's the way you could interpret it, right? But to a certain extent, like, it's very interesting. But this idea of like, this is the way things are right now is just to say, like, this is reality. There's no getting away from it. And I actually think it's not right, the gaslight, but it's to say, like, yes, what you're with is the way things are right now, but we can't push it away. Like, we can't get rid of it. So then I am in my shower, curtains open, like running cool water on, and it was all over my abdomen, some on my leg, some on my groin. And I'm in my shower, like with my arms just like against the shower wall.
Oh no.
Running cool water down my belly. And my wife is there. She's just scratching my back, right? Just like rubbing my back. And I'm just crying. I'm just in tears. And this happened. I was applying for a PhD program. This happened in the midst of, it was a few weeks before the application was due. I think I was planning to take the GRE the next week. I had been waking up at 3:30 a.m. every morning to study for the GRE for a couple hours before going to work, and then coming home. And at the time I was working till like 6:30. And it was just, I mean, I had it in my mind, like, this is just a season. I just need to work through this. And we can go into that later, because I've learned a lot from that experience and realized that's not the way to do things. But I was like stressed to the max, and it just felt like, you know, and so I'm just there bawling my eyes out, and I'm just saying over and over again, like, this is the way things are right now.
Oh no.
And I was just saying, I was just like, I'm sad, and this hurts, and life is really hard right now, and this is the way things are right now. And it really didn't relieve the pain. It was excruciating, but it helped me to be with it. Because for one of the first times in my life, I was experiencing something that was really painful. And the only thing I had to deal with was that it was painful. I wasn't also putting effort into pushing the pain away. And that's essentially what the idea of suffering is in the mindfulness tradition and in the tradition of the Buddhists, is that what suffering is pain, the physical pain, the experience, plus emotional resistance. So if we can take away the emotional resistance, all we're left is with the pain. And if we can take away the judgment, the reaction, then the pain is much more bearable because we're not projecting it into the future. Right? Because the first thing was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to deal with this until it heat. Like there was all that with it too, of me projecting how awful the rest of my week was going to be. But I was able to, thank you, Annika Harris, I was able to step back and dude, I just bawled my eyes out. And I was just there with it, crying. And kudos to my wife, man, because she wasn't trying to fix it, nor could she have. And so then after a little while, she just kind of started saying to me too, like, yeah, this is the way things are right now. And so that was I don't know how we started there on that, but this recognition that like we can be with what is right now, like come hell or high water, like whatever it is, like we can just be with it as it is. We don't have to push it away, is life-changing, really. And it's something that really we can keep it as a good idea and be like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be more present. I'm going to be less resistant. But as long as it stays as an idea, it's not going to happen. That's why the mindfulness practice is so important, that we do it like a little bit every day. I think in the way that you're talking about is because if I was trying to use mindfulness to make my pain decrease, it would have just only created more frustration, just kind of like you're talking about. But instead, what it helped me to do is actually say like, okay, I don't need to make this go away. I can't make it go away, but I can stop pushing it away. And as soon as I stop pushing it away, it's so much more bearable.
Abigail will often say, pain is a weird sensation.
Yeah, she's got that right.
So with pain, what's so interesting is that it is sort of incapable of being changed for the most part, right? Like physical pain, if you have like a burn or if you have chronic pain of some sort, that seems to be the perfect candidate for mindfulness, because it's not going somewhere, and really all we do is we add to it by our own distress about it. Although there's situations where maybe we're in a life or death situation, we're in pain, and us trying to get rid of it by sewing our arm up or something.
Certainly, yeah.
But I'm curious, in that vein, have you chewed on the idea of spiritual bypassing at all, and how that relates to your mindfulness practice, how that relates to how you see your own emotional life or your work with clients?
I was just thinking about this the other day. I almost sent you a clip from Waking Up, because he was talking with a guy about mindfulness being used just as a spiritual bypass.
Maybe explaining first and foremost to the listeners what spiritual bypass is loosely considered to be.
Yeah,
why is it a danger?
It's worth saying too that I think even before that mindfulness was introduced to the West because of pain. So John Kabat-Zinn in 1979, I think, at the University of Massachusetts, he had his own mindfulness practice, and he was working with this. There was a group of chronic pain patients, and nothing was making it better. These are people who, no matter what happens, they're going to go the rest of their lives with pain for a variety of reasons. And essentially, that's where he said, okay, well, let me try what works for my life. Maybe that can help these people. And he introduced what it was developed to be mindfulness-based stress reduction. And out of that is essentially what that is the fountain through which mindfulness has really proliferated in the West and entered into the medical industry, into therapy, into all that. So pain.
Thank you, John Kabat-Zinn. I didn't tell you, I'm actually doing I'm doing a pain management group that sort of just follows loosely mindfulness-based stress reduction in January.
Dude, that's pain. Awesome.
Yeah, we got to talk about it at some point. But
yeah, man, that's so cool. That's exciting, man.
Yeah. But anyway, spiritual bypass. You're saying that it came into the West through Kabat-Zinn.
Mindful, yeah. So, what do you, when you say spiritual bypass? What do you mean? Like, what do you think of?
That's a great question. I think what it means for me is whenever I'm using mindfulness to avoid my experience, or I'm pushing it away in some way, or if maybe you could see mindfulness as like seeing things more clearly, I think, in its perfect form. And this would be a distortion of that, where because mindfulness is always coming back to the breath, it's coming back to a physical sensation, it's coming back to your body. There could be a temptation to use that all the time, at the expense of maybe listening to the message an emotion has for you, a part has for you. I remember you and I were doing Headspace for about a year, and then I started reading No Bad Parts. You started reading No Bad Parts, and we both were like, my mindfulness practice has been severely disturbed because now I'm not just letting go of parts of me, I'm engaging them as if they're other people. And that's a much more sophisticated approach than the simplicity. I love the simplicity of mindfulness.
Yeah.
So I guess it would be maybe like using it to avoid contact with your emotions.
Yeah. What if you give us a little rundown on IFS? This is inevitable that we have some conversation about IFS. We kind of outline the framework, the basic idea. Probably would be worth doing as well with mindfulness, but introduced mindful. You introduced the book No Bad Parts. You introduced me to IFS, which has changed my life.
Ironically, I thought you had introduced me to my IFS because you were getting into interpersonal IPT, and I kept trying to find IPT, and I couldn't remember what the acronym was, and then I found IFS, and I was like, this is the thing that John Paul's talking about. This is amazing. How did he find this?
That's hysterical, man.
Yeah. Okay, so
but
just a
quick
primer, very, very quick overview.
Give us a primer,
I do want to go back to spiritual bypass, just because I think we talked so much about mindfulness. Maybe let's give a quick overview, not an in-depth one, so that we can talk about IFS in the spiritual bypass conversation. IFS stands for Internal Family Systems, developed by a guy named Dr. Richard Schwartz. And he was...
Oh my gosh, wait. I gotta tell you this. Can I tell you this? Dude, the other day, I woke up in the morning. I woke my wife up saying, Dick Schwartz. Dick Schwartz. And that's what he goes by, for the record. He goes by Dick Schwartz. And what I was doing is, dude, I say this because we're so interested. And Mike and I both love dreams. I was having a dream. And I was having a dream that I was at a conference, and I was teaching someone about IFS, and they were like, whoa, this is so cool. Like, what is it? Who's the name of this guy? And for whatever reason, and I think it's because I've been using audio memos so often maybe, but I was in my dream, I was speaking into my phone, like doing an audio to text, saying, like, giving the person the name of this book of like No Bad Parts by Dick Schwartz. And that's like literally, I just found myself, I woke myself up saying it. And I was just at, 4 in the morning.
Did your alarm wake you up? Or did you just wake up naturally?
So I think my light might have been on. I have a wake up light, so it gradually comes on, but the sound wasn't there yet. Mm-hmm. But it was just it was very interesting. I know, dream work is something that is fascinating.
That sounds like a movie scene. You're in a dream, and then the person sits up and just is left with one word.
Dick Schwartz.
It sounds like that's the beginning of like a murder scene or something.
Yeah, dude. My wife was like, what? She was like, do you know what you're saying? I was like, yeah, I was just telling a guy about IFS in my dream.
Oh my gosh, that's so coherent compared to my dreams. My dreams are like, I had a dear friend recently, who I'll tell you about later, who in my dream went on Facebook and publicly endorsed evolution. I woke up just like scratching my head. What does that mean? My dreams are just so incoherent.
But what's so strange about going on Facebook and publicly endorsing evolution?
Does that seem normal to you?
I endorse evolution.
No. I'm just saying for that to be a dream material is very odd.
Yeah. I mean, right. But yeah.
No, there's nothing against evolution.
I was wondering. I was like, wait, Mike, I thought we were on the same page with evolution here.
Part of it too is that the dream is coded. The dream is coded with other bits that are a bit random that I'm realizing I don't really know if I want the public to. No. But IFS, so internal family systems, the basic idea is everybody has parts, and parts are as intuitive as you would think them to be. You know, parts being, I think the example he always gives in his videos is, do you want to go out tonight? A friend might ask you, and you say, well, part of me does, and a part of me doesn't.
Yeah.
So as simple as that, we all kind of use that language anyway when we talk about how we feel about things. And the big leap here is that, rather than just seeing things as emotions or our inner world as symptoms primarily, which is something that the medical model has adopted, we see them embedded more so in their historical context. So for example, we might have a part of us that's very young, and because it had maybe, let's say, an unmet developmental need for, esteem and affection. It might be still stuck in that place of feeling the loss of esteem and affection, still feel like it's in that place. And so the basic idea of IFS is that subpersonalities is normal. It's not something that's just left to the fringes of something like dissociative identity disorder, which is, I guess, that movie Split kind of highlights really well. And so first of all, it normalizes that IFS normalizes that the mind is not just one unitary entity, but it's split into many different entities. And each of those parts has their own worldview. It has their own maybe sense of self, sense of others, emotional content, things that it's motivated by, particular concerns that it cares about. And that's a really good thing to have parts that all care about different things. But what IFS works with is when the self is fractured and the parts are not working together and they're polarized from one another. So for example, we might have a part of us that's very, very practical, and it's interested in efficiency and responsibility and being on time. And we might have another part of us that's much more interested in personal connection and intimacy and friendship. And the inner conflict can play out when we're at the end of a good conversation and a dear friend of ours is maybe sharing something intimate. Yeah. And we're late for something. And so we feel a part of us pulling us one direction and a part of us pulling us another. So IFS is a model to engage yourself. It's also worth knowing that the other big tenet of IFS is the idea that there is a capital S self, which is a Jungian idea. And that is that there's a space in us which is curious and stable and loving and compassionate and open and creative, unbreakable and undamaged by our traumas, that is always ever present. And to the degree to which that part of us, or not part, but really our core self, is online and has its natural resources available, is the degree to which our parts can work together. So, if we're
the natural leader too of the parts.
Mm-hmm. And that's the thing that usually is a hang up for most people is, what is the self? Because we all have parts of us that might act very self-like, might act very calm, but maybe they're doing
therapist parts
for that want to be perceived as calm, or that are peacemaking parts. So but the weird thing about IFS that I always have to get my clients on board with is that you're not just talking about parts of you, which is what all of us do. Or, I find that, before IFS, this is what I did with my close friends and close relationships was I would speak about a part of me, rather than speaking from a part. Yeah. And my sister Maria, who's very psychologically adept, says that's sort of the equivalent of, you being next to your best friend and sort of explaining his life for him rather than just saying, how are you? And letting him explain how his life is going.
Yeah.
So it's a model of, it gives us the tools to sort of not only respect each person in our life and respect ourselves, but progressively to have this nuanced approach of respecting the dignity of each part of us too.
Yeah.
Which is what then liberates them to share their story. I mean, that's the most fascinating part, is that when you get curious about parts, they end up sharing their history, their worldview, their thoughts. Anyway, so that's the gist of the model. It's a way to get to relate to yourself in a much more compassionate way.
Yeah.
And also
nuanced.
It gives you that nuanced perspective of parts of yourself rather than, why do I feel like I want this thing and I don't want it? Right. It gives us a way out of a lot of confusion too. So that's an overview. Go ahead, comment on that. I'm curious to.
Well, I was just going to say, you told me the other day that you heard someone say that Dick Schwartz, who developed IFS, that if Freud was the greatest psychological thinker in the 20th century, that Dick Schwartz is greatest psychological thinker, or the most impactful thinker of the 21st century. That's a pretty. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out, and I wouldn't be surprised at all. I think it's so much more nuanced. It's it honors our stories, and it honors this idea that we're always perceiving, right, the good. It's been said that the good is that which we desire. That's like an operational definition of the good. The good is that what we desire. It's not a very good definition to say what exactly it is in essence, but whatever it is that we desire is a good. And even when we're doing things that are harmful to us or painful to us, or it's because we're approaching like some perceived good. And I think IFS hits that right on the head. And I think that, I don't really teach people about IFS in my work. I kind of just start doing it because it sounds so wacky and esoteric and sounds kind of new agey and weird. And there's parts of us that are so skeptical, we just welcome those parts in. But this idea that there are no bad parts is life-changing when you realize that, there's that they came out of a need to keep us safe and keep us protected, but they got stuck there.
Do you ever have any doubts about that statement? Do you ever feel like there are bad parts?
No. Not really. No. To you, Michael?
Do I have to? I think there's times where I have this sense of, okay, if I trust the process, we're probably going to get to a point where I can see this with the awareness to where I see how it's going towards a perceived good. But in the moment, I have this feeling of like, I have a really hard time seeing it as good, or maybe I question, is the best approach to merely just validate this part, let me try to put in a flesh on this. Like I'm always interested in what's the most helpful approach, and that's person by person.
Yeah.
And sometimes I wonder if maybe like an extremely addictive part, sometimes just getting some sobriety in with the client can be the best thing. Right. And labeling it as a good part is actually not so helpful, because maybe you want to, there's a reason why we demonize parts of the self, and maybe for a time to get sobriety, to get space from the parts compulsion. I definitely feel that, that sense of, I don't know if this is the most important way to approach this right now.
Yeah. I think that the most important thing is to this is really what the work is about, is creating the relationship between the capital S self and the parts. And so that there's an agreement there. And that's what's key. And the way that's described, I think it's something that, as you practice it, you see that it's true. And I think maybe sometimes I have parts of me that kind of have this of like, oh, I'm not sure, but not often, man. I really believe that people are good. And I mean, people who do great atrocities challenge that at times. But man, the scary thing is that you look at these people who commit great atrocities, and so many times you look at their lives, and I kind of ask myself, well, what the hell else does the world expect from someone who's been treated this way? I haven't yet to hear about somebody that has committed great evil that has really had a walk in the park. And maybe that's because I just haven't heard of them, but I think this is a beautiful thing with IFS, right? So one of the examples, right, we work with so often is just anxiety, people who just feel overwhelmed with anxiety. And I think what you were talking about earlier with this shift in mindfulness is this curiosity is the key here, right? Without curiosity, I think mindfulness there's that tendency to just be kind of diffused, just kind of be distant, be disconnected. And to clarify, right, what's interesting is that what the Buddhists say is no self, which is the nature of mind, which is this place of equanimity, natural resting, of being, of peace and calm and connection with reality, is the same thing as Schwartz's idea of the self, capital S self, which is this place of calm, connected, courageousness.
I still struggle with that. The idea that I there was moments where I think I said this on the podcast last time, where I said I feel like I've had moments of transcending the self and they've been brief. But most of the time, my center of gravity, every time Sam is like, notice that there's this contraction of the mind where the self is contained. And notice that that is an object of consciousness, which means that it is not consciousness itself. But for me, I always just feel like I have a sense of self that is consciousness.
That's what I think it is. And so that's where I think it's a term thing. I think self, no self, real self, false self, true self. These words are all used in really, really different ways.
Speak to that.
They're used in different ways. Like, so there's this idea, right, from John Paul II that we only find ourselves when we give a full gift of self. And, something that we were coming up to last session is the idea of embodiment. Okay, my Mac is going to die.
Do you have a charger?
I have a charger.
Do you have your iPhone?
I have my iPhone, but my Rode mic is what I'm using as my charger.
Your Rode mic you're using as your charger. You mean you're using the charger port? Or you're using...
I have one wire that functions as both my charger and my Rode mic.
Do you have a charger for your phone?
Oh, no, dang it. I have a charger for my phone.
Do you want to use your phone
to record? Well, then I wouldn't be able to use the Rode mic. No, Mikey. Onward and inward. The dirty tap water. Dang it. Shoot.
All right, we're at a brief intermission, folks. We'll be coming back to you live.